Backpacking season is here, and if you've tried searching for a tent lately, you know how fast it gets overwhelming. Specs, price tags, endless debates about which brand is worth it. So let's simplify this and break down how to actually choose the right backpacking tent. So there's three variables you want to look at right out of the gate: price, weight, and durability. And if you get either of these wrong, you're either carrying more gear than you need or lying awake in a storm wondering why you didn't spend another 50 bucks. We'll discuss options in a few different price ranges, and at the end, I'll give you a few budget picks as well. But first, let's talk about weight. Weight is where most people get tripped up when choosing a tent. When you start looking at backpacking tents, the term ultralight is plastered all over the marketing pages, and it starts to feel like if your tent weighs more than like 2 pounds, you're doing something wrong. And that's just not true. Weight does matter, but only in proportion to how far you're hiking and how much everything else in your pack weighs. If you're doing a 15-mile day with like 4,000 feet of elevation gain, then yeah, you're gonna feel every extra ounce. But if you're just rolling into a campsite after a 6-mile stroll on flat trail, an extra pound of tent weight probably isn't gonna ruin your life. So before you even start looking at tents, think about what kind of trips you're actually going to do, and not the fantasy trips, the real ones. Okay, so let's talk about tent styles, because this is actually super important, and I don't think it gets explained well enough. You've basically got three main categories: freestanding, semi-freestanding, and non-freestanding. Freestanding tents hold their shape with their own poles. You can pick up the whole thing and move it around after it's set up. These are generally more forgiving to set up, especially on weird terrain or if you're tired and it's getting dark and you just want your tent to cooperate with you. The Big Agnes Copper Spur and the Nemo Dagger are probably the two freestanding tents you're going to keep seeing recommended in this weight class, and for good reason. Both come in at around 3 to 3.5 pounds for the 2-person version, and both have solid livability for their weight. The Copper Spur has been around forever and has a huge user base, myself included. Tons of trip reports, lots of real-world feedback on it. You can see it in nearly all of my backpacking videos. The Dagger is Nemo's answer to that same category, and it's genuinely excellent. Nemo updated the fabric on the Osmo version, and the weather performance is really impressive for the weight. Both sit in that $500 to $600 range depending on if you can catch it on sale, and I think that price is pretty well justified considering what you're getting. And keep in mind that most 2-person backpacking tents are really comfortable for 1 person plus gear, or 2 people if you don't mind being really close. I personally prefer a 2-person tent on my solo trips. All right, semi-freestanding tents usually need a stake or two to stand up properly, but they're often lighter because they use fewer poles. The Big Agnes Tiger Wall fits into this category, significantly lighter than the Copper Spur at a little over 2 pounds and sitting in a similar price range, which makes it a really compelling option if saving weight is a priority. The trade-off is you do need to stake out the footprint to get it fully functional. Just worth being aware of if you camp on rock slabs or hardpack. If your trips are mostly established campsites with moderate mileage, the weight savings here can absolutely justify choosing this over the heavier models. And when we're looking at these options in a backpacking tent, another thing to consider is single wall versus double wall. Most freestanding tents use a mesh inner plus a separate rainfly, which helps manage condensation. Single wall designs save weight, but you'll often notice more interior moisture in certain conditions. Ventilation placement and peak vents matter a lot here too. Good ventilation design often makes a bigger difference than just the wall construction alone. And that brings us to the non-freestanding tents. These are your trekking pole setups, typically single wall. They rely entirely on stakes and guy lines to hold their shape, so rocky or technical ground requires a bit of strategy and some experience. But the weight savings here can be significant, and once you get comfortable setting them up, a lot of people find them really fast and intuitive. The Durston X Mid 2 has become one of the most talked about tents in this category over the last few years. years, and I think it deserves the attention. The geometry is really well thought out. It's got excellent interior space for the weight, and the weather performance is strong. The X-Mid 2 is made from Sil Poly rather than Dyneema, which keeps the price down around $350 and makes it more packable. For a lot of people, this is kind of the sweet spot of the trekking pole tent world. But if you want to go even further down the ultralight rabbit hole, the Z-Pack's Duplex is kind of the tent at the end of that road. Dyneema fabric gets the weight down to around a pound for a 2-person tent, and it's genuinely remarkable. The trade-off here is that Dyneema isn't as packable as nylon or Sil Poly, it's less abrasive resistant, and the tent runs over $700. For thru hikers and people who are really serious about their base weight, this type of tent can make a lot of sense. For someone who camps a few weekends a year, it's probably more than the price justifies. And let's talk about weather protection for a minute, because I see people make assumptions here that can really bite them. 3-season tents are the default for most backpackers, and they handle a pretty wide range of conditions: rain, wind, some light snow. Now, if you're doing true winter mountaineering or heavy snow trips, that's a separate category entirely. You're looking at 4-season tents here, which is kind of beyond what we're covering in this video. And keep in mind that 3-season is kind of a spectrum. A cheap 3-season tent and a well-engineered 3-season tent are going to behave very differently in real storms. And wind performance is just as important as waterproof ratings. Pole structures, guy out points, and how well you pitch the tent make a huge difference in storms. When it comes to waterproofing, one thing to look at is the hydrostatic head rating on the rainfly and on the floor. You generally want at least a 1500 millimeter rating for the rainfly, and ideally higher for the floor. And the Nemo Dagger gets strong marks here. Nemo put real effort into the fabric performance on their updated Osmo fabric. And I've had my Big Agnes copper spur in multiple all-night downpours and some light snow, and it stayed dry every time. If you're doing shoulder season trips, late fall, early spring, or higher elevation, these conditions are worth thinking about before you commit to a tent. And don't overlook the quality of life features like doors, vestibules, interior organization. These are really underrated features. Most of the tents we discussed have 2 doors, which is kind of a luxury if you're a solo backpacker and almost a necessity if you're camping with a partner. And in the rain especially, having a decent vestibule makes a huge difference. The Copper Spur has 2 pretty well-sized vestibules, and the Dagger Osmo has 2 huge ones. And the interior dimensions of a tent often matter more than the total square footage. The peak height and the slopes of the walls can really affect how livable a tent actually feels. And a footprint can extend the life of a lighter tent floor, but it also adds weight. So it's a trade-off worth thinking about. So if you're not ready to spend $500 to $600 on a tent, which is completely reasonable, and you're not ready to make the leap to an ultralight trekking pole shelter, there are a few budget options worth knowing about. The REI Half Dome is a classic at around $350, freestanding, genuinely roomy, 2 doors, 2 vestibules, and it handles rain pretty well. It is on the heavier side, close to 5 pounds, but it's a tent that a lot of people buy and just keep using for years. If you camp a few weekends a year and don't want to overthink it, it's a solid place to land. And then if you really want to keep the cost down, something like the Cloud Up from Nature Hike is hovering around $100 to $150, which is kind of unreal for a backpacking tent that still comes in at under 5 pounds. Now, the materials are a step below what you'd get from the brands we've been discussing, and you'll likely feel that over time. But a lot of people have put real miles on these things, and apparently they hold up decently well. If you're not sure backpacking is going to stick for you yet, or you're just trying to get out on your first few trips without dropping a ton of money, it's a legitimate option. What matters more than the logo on the rainfly is whether the tent 100% fits the kind of trips you're actually going to take. If you're heading into longer miles with rougher weather or wet conditions, that's when the little details like weight, durability, vestibule size, or waterproofing starts to actually make a big impact. So if you backpack more than a handful of times a year, spending a bit more on something lighter or more weather resistant usually pays off pretty quickly in comfort and durability. And if you want to see how all of this fits into a complete backpacking setup, check out this next video. It walks through all the gear you actually need, from shelters to stoves, and how it all works together. So think through the trips you're actually planning, choose accordingly, and I'll see you on the trail.